I saw my mom cheating on my dad. It was terrible. It happened on a Thursday evening, one of those ordinary days that would blur into the rest if not for what I saw. I had just finished football practice and was heading home, the kind of tired that makes you want to collapse on your bed and sleep until the next morning. I wasn't supposed to be home that early. Dad was out of town on a business trip, and I thought Mom was working late at her office like she always did. But something nagged at me that evening, a strange intuition that made me skip the detour to hang out with friends and go straight home. I pulled into the driveway, and that's when I noticed it, the black Mercedes parked in front of our house. It was sleek, expensive, not the kind of car my mom or dad drove. I thought maybe it was a client or a friend, but there was something off about the way it was hidden from plain view, partially tucked behind a hedge. I didn't think much of it at first, chalking it up to one of those random, unexplainable things. But as I approached the front door, my stomach tightened. The house was unusually quiet, no television or music playing like it usually would be if Mom was home. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender air freshener hanging in the air, mingling with something else, something heavier, like perfume but far too strong. That's when I heard it. Laughter. A man's deep, husky laugh, echoing from the living room. It wasn't my dad's voice. My heart raced as I crept toward the sound, each step feeling heavier than the last. I wanted to turn around, to leave before I saw something I couldn't unsee. But some morbid curiosity, or maybe dread, pushed me forward. And then I saw them. My mom, sitting on the edge of the couch, her face flushed, eyes locked on a man who was definitely not my father. His hand was on her knee, slowly trailing up her thigh in a way that made my stomach churn. The intimacy of their exchange hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the touch, it was the look in her eyes, an expression I'd never seen on her face before. She was laughing, carefree, like she was someone completely different from the mom I knew. I felt sick. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, but I couldn't move. I stood there, frozen, staring at them in shock. Every second felt like an eternity, my brain struggling to process what I was witnessing. This was my mother, the woman who had kissed me goodnight for as long as I could remember, who baked cookies with me when I was a kid, who told me stories about her and Dad meeting in college and falling in love. This was the woman I trusted more than anyone. And here she was, betraying us. They hadn't seen me yet. I don't know if they ever would have if I hadn't taken a shaky step backward, accidentally knocking over a vase that stood near the entrance. The sound of ceramic shattering against the hardwood floor snapped them out of their bubble, and my mom's head whipped around. Her face drained of color when she saw me standing there, wide-eyed and horrified. "Jason," she breathed, her voice cracking. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even look her in the eye. I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. All I could do was turn and run, out of the house, out into the cold night air that slapped me awake. I jumped in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere felt better than being in that house. I pulled over in a random parking lot miles from home, my chest heaving as I struggled to breathe. The tears came then, uncontrollable, burning as they streamed down my face. I wasn't crying because I was sad, I was furious. I was disgusted. How could she do this to us? To Dad? My mind raced with questions, none of which had answers. I didn't know if I would ever get answers. Hours passed before my phone buzzed. It was my mom, texting me over and over, but I couldn't bring myself to read her messages. I couldn't even bear to see her name on the screen. Eventually, I silenced the notifications and drove aimlessly for what felt like forever. I finally ended up at my best friend Jake's place. I didn't tell him what happened, I couldn't. I made up some excuse about a fight with my mom and crashed on his couch. But sleep never came. All I could see when I closed my eyes was the image of my mom with that stranger. It replayed in my mind like a broken record, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The next morning, I knew I had to go back. Dad was coming home that evening, and I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do. When I walked through the front door, my mom was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and swollen from crying. The man was long gone. "Jason," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to see that." I didn't respond. I couldn't even look at her. My whole body felt numb. "Please, let me explain," she begged, her voice shaking. "It was a mistake, it's not what you think. Please, let me explain," she begged, her voice shaking. "It was a mistake, it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I snapped, finally meeting her gaze, my voice colder than I ever thought possible. "I saw you, Mom. I saw everything." She flinched, as if my words had physically struck her. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I couldn't feel any sympathy. Not now. Maybe not ever. "I'm going to tell Dad," I said, the words heavy in the air. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. Her face went pale. "Jason, please. Please don't." "I'll tell him. I will. Just give me time. Please." I looked at her, the woman who had raised me, who had been my whole world for so long, and I realized I didn't know her anymore. I didn't recognize the person sitting in front of me. And it terrified me. I left the house again, not knowing what was going to happen next. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if Dad could either. But the worst part was knowing that no matter what happened, nothing would ever be the same again. Everything was broken,